Hello, this is Sarah Brash. Welcome back to my channel. So I want to do a video right now about Kyle Rittenhouse, and I want to discuss something very specific. So he was a young man, he was underage at the time, who had a weapon, and I believe it was a military grade weapon, but I believe he's from Illinois, but he went to the protests following the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which I guess is just across the border from where he was living in Illinois. I believe that's correct. I believe that's correct information. I'm not 100% about that, but I think that's generally what happened. And so then he went there, I guess, with the intention of protecting the business of a man, and I guess this was actually a person of color whose business he was helping protect. That's what I read. I believe that to be correct. And anyway, at some point he was attacked by protesters, BLM protesters, after the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and he shot 3 of them and he killed 2 of them. And he was on trial for murder, and then he was acquitted. He argued self-defense and he won that argument. And I actually agree with that argument from what I know of the facts of the case. So anyway, so that's what happened. I'm sure most people, I'm sure everyone watching this actually already knows all of that information, but just in case there's anyone who doesn't know. So anyway, so a lot of people have been up in arms after his acquittal because they think that this is, well, of course they think it's, exemplifies the state of the egregious state of racism in the United States and white supremacy, but also they're up in arms because they think that this is basically giving carte blanche to vigilantes to go ahead and execute people as a form of extrajudicial vigilante, injustice, and then to just, to cry self-defense afterwards. And so, and also when people say that what Kyle Rittenhouse did was extrajudicial vigilante injustice, what they're also referring to as well is not just the fact that he shot 3 people and killed 2, but the fact that he was there, a 17-year-old at the time, with a weapon, acting basically as the police force, acting as the police, and that he had essentially deputized himself to act as the police in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and to police the public space with a weapon as a 17-year-old, and that, people say, well, there was a vacuum. There was a police vacuum. The police were not acting to maintain law and order in the public space. And then other people will say, well, even so, that just because there's a vacuum of the police have left a vacuum and the public space is devolving into chaos and to lawlessness, that still doesn't mean that, a 17-year-old should be able to deputize himself to police the public space in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Not even his town, not even his state, and moreover with a weapon, with a military grade weapon. That this is just a recipe for disaster. And that may very well be the case. But what I really want to talk about in this video is the fact that so many of the people who are screaming that this has given carte blanche to vigilantes, that this is the exoneration and the adulation and the exaltation of extrajudicial vigilante injustice, then so many of these people are people who have, and not, they haven't just done this to me, They haven't just done this to me. They've done this to so many other people. Just so many other people. These are people who repeatedly have indulged in cancel culture and trial by Twitter without due process. So many of the people who are screaming that the Kyle Rittenhouse acquittal is the exaltation of, and, basically just, giving the stamp of approval to extrajudicial vigilante injustice. So many of those people are part of the woke KKK. So many of those people tried to mob me repeatedly to suicide, and many other private citizen nobodies without power or resources to defend themselves or to fight back, especially the vulnerable like me with mental health disabilities and a vulnerability to suicide. So many persons who are screaming that the Kyle Rittenhouse acquittal is the exaltation of extrajudicial vigilante injustice are people that have been part of the woke KKK mob that is still trying. They never stopped. They never stopped trying to get me killed, drive me to suicide, incite my murder, impose a grossly disproportionate sentence of social death or suicide upon me, or murder. And they're still calling, they're still trying to get me fired. Right now, there's a massive campaign, including by blue checkmark public figures on Twitter, including by Twitter and Jack Dorsey themselves, to silence me, to deplatform me, to unperson me, so that I can't speak the truth about what they did to me during the witch hunt at Yale that almost got me killed and the subsequent global defamation campaign. And that is the woke KKK exploiting cancel culture and trial by Twitter without due process to impose grossly disproportionate sentences of social death and suicide on private citizen nobodies, typically the vulnerable with mental health disabilities, and people usually without resources who can't fight back and can't defend themselves. And they're doing this in denial of their constitutional fair trial protections, in denial of their due process rights without any due process. And they're doing this in an extrajudicial manner, and it's typically by meting out vigilante mob injustice, especially on social media, especially on Twitter, via trial by Twitter without due process. And they're doing this over alleged and non-crimes of unwokeness. And in my case, they're doing it right now. They're doing it today. They're trying to destroy me, get me disbarred, get me fired from my temp job that is barely keeping me alive, barely keeping me off the streets. They're trying to get me expelled. They're trying to get me fired. They're trying to render me destitute, penniless, unable to support myself. They're trying to strip me of my law license, strip me of my means of survival, because they aren't satisfied with having destroyed my lifelong human and civil rights, academic and legal careers. They want me dead. They want me dead. And they're doing this over a more than 3.5-year-old non-event and non-crime that was turned into a global racial hysteria by the fake news press and moral outrage industry. And they're doing it for moral outrage industry money, and a lot of them also did it to target and demonize white women in particular, especially vulnerable white women, especially those with mental health disabilities like me. And they did this for moral outrage industry money and status and gain, of course, but they also did it to smear Trump. That was a huge part of why they did this. And I want to make this point especially clear. And if anything is extrajudicial, vigilante, mob injustice, the woke KKK, it's cancel culture and trial by Twitter without due process, okay? That's extrajudicial, vigilante injustice. Injustice. And it's destroying us. It's destroying our egalitarian public space. It's destroying our legal system. It's destroying our society. And also, I want to make this point very clear. The people who are doing this, the people and organizations who are doing this, who are the woke KKK, who are participating in cancel culture and trial by Twitter, which is the definition of extrajudicial vigilante injustice. The people who are doing this, they are largely people who claim to be anti the carceral state, which is another point I want to make. But also, I want to make this point very, very clear. The people and organizations that are doing this, they are happy to exploit the killings and shootings, including the police killings and shootings of Black men and boys, including Jacob Blake, including Ahmaud Arbery, including Adam Toledo, including George Floyd, including Daunte Wright, all of them. They are happy to exploit the police killings and shootings of Black men and boys, and just the killings and shootings, period, of Black men and boys, to destroy the Living While Black movement by turning it into a race hoax and a blood sport, to target and demonize white women, especially vulnerable white women without resources and with mental health disabilities. They destroyed these charlatans and frauds who are indulging in extrajudicial vigilante injustice and cancel culture and trial by Twitter without due process. The woke KKK, they don't care about racism. They don't care about Black people. They don't care about police brutality. They care about making moral outrage industry money. That's what they care about. They have no problem exploiting the killings and shootings of Black men and boys. They have no problem destroying the Living While Black movement by turning it into a race hoax and blood sport, by pushing obvious Living While Black race and hate crime hoaxes. And they're doing this to target and demonize vulnerable white women, and they're doing it to make a cheap and easy buck off of the carcasses of these vulnerable white women that they're trying to get killed. And so if people want to scream and shout, and usually it's the people who claim to be anti the carceral state who are doing this, and they're anything but anti the carceral state if they're doing this. Okay, great. So you don't want to put people in prison, you just want to put people to death, including social death. You want to drive people to suicide, drive private citizen nobodies to suicide on Twitter via cancel culture and trial by Twitter without due process, without their constitutional fair trial protections, without a fair trial, without any due process whatsoever. That's what you want to do. Oh, okay. So I guess that makes you anti the carceral state. And these idiots who claim to be anti the carceral state who are doing this, including the former appeal members, the appeal which is dead and needs to remain dead, former president of the appeal, Josie Duffy Rice, the appeal member, Rebecca Kavanaugh, who is an attorney, and Tennille, Rebecca Kavanaugh in particular, she tried to tell me, oh, well, due process isn't a thing if you're not, in a courtroom. Okay, great. So, who else thought that? The KKK. And that's why I refer to her as a member of the woke KKK. The KKK also thought that extrajudicial mob vigilante injustice, including meting out death as a grossly disproportionate and immediate sentence for alleged and non-crimes, in that case usually of Black men, they didn't think it was a problem that they didn't abide by, they didn't honor the due process rights of their victims also. Just like Rebecca Kavanaugh, attorney Rebecca Kavanaugh, doesn't think that that's a problem. And that's why she indulges in cancel culture and trial by Twitter without due process, and that's why she's a member of the woke KKK, and that's why she tried repeatedly to destroy me, to mob me to suicide, called for me to be fired, expelled, disbarred, called for me to be irrevocably destroyed so I would be left destitute and penniless and have no choice but to kill myself and never be able to get a job again. She did that to me repeatedly for the past more than 3.5 years. And she tried to say that's okay because it wasn't a courtroom, it was on Twitter. So that means that she doesn't have to respect my due process rights. Due process doesn't apply. Okay, so that's what the KKK thought too. Yeah, and that's why I refer to these people as the woke KKK. Okay, I don't want this video to get too long, so I'm gonna wrap up there. But I love you all so much. I will have all of my fundraising links below. Please donate. I love you all so much for your support and kind words, but please also donate so that we can end cancel culture, we can end trial by Twitter, we can prevent one more person, innocent person's life from being destroyed. We can stop one more suicide before it happens. Okay, I love you all so much. Take care. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.